That's another key point you just rattled off, is that, and we've heard the state legislatures and governors and attorney generals talk about this, and it's in the bill, that it in some cases doubles the amount of money that states must levy to give to Medicare and Medicaid.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Now, normally, when the Congress wants to control a state legislature, it bribes it. So, for example, did you ever wonder why speed limits are the same all around the country? Did you ever wonder why the blood alcohol content in a person's veins sufficient to charge them for drunk driving is the same in every state? Did all 50 states just magically adopt the same standards? No. The Congress adopted the standards, was told by its lawyers these standards wouldn't fly because the Constitution doesn't authorize the Congress to do this. So the Congress went to the states and said, here's hundreds of millions of dollars to repave your highways. But if you accept this money, you have to legislate about speed limits and blood alcohol content as we want. That's a bribe. If you or I, Alex, or anybody listening to us now went to a state legislature and said, here's cash, now write the law the way I want it, we would be arrested, and rightly so, for attempted bribery. In this case, with this health care legislation, there is no bribe. There is an outright command from the Congress to the state legislatures. You shall license more physicians. You shall spend more money. When the Congress does that, that's called commandeering a state legislature. And the Supreme Court in the past 15 years has twice prohibited the Congress from doing that. So that's another unconstitutional aspect of this. It invades an area of state sovereignty, the regulation of the medical profession, reserved to the states.
So we're right back to the Declaration of Independence, where they talk about unelected governors coming in and overriding the legislatures, commanding them, taxation without representation. The Democrats know this is all illegal, and I guess that's why Limbaugh and others are openly saying they may try martial law. Now they want to take over the internet with cybersecurity. We'll talk about it all straight ahead. Stay with us. Scores of new taxes. 16,500 plus IRS agents. They decide what type of medical care you're allowed to have under insurance. They then tax your medical savings accounts. It forces the working poor to go out and get insurance. It lowers the quality of the standards. Judge Andrew Napolitano is our guest. Judge, you're right when you make the point. This is the mad rush. And now that they've already done something this unpopular and committed political suicide, Kerry's saying, hey, we got to go ahead and pass the carbon tax. We got to go ahead and pass blanket total amnesty. We've got to go ahead and pass cybersecurity, which even the Associated Press says allows Obama to completely shut the web off if he so chooses. They want to pass the new Enemy Belligerence Act that says for any intelligence value or such other matters as the president considers, you may be secretly arrested and interrogated and held. I mean, and Lindsey Graham is arguing for similar legislation.
Do you know how hideous that piece of legislation it is? It actually says the only way you can get out of military confinement and even appear before a judge, Alex, is if the House and Senate Intelligence Committees vote to let you out. What a perversion of our system of justice, that instead of having judges say to the government, thou shalt not violate the right of any person, because the Constitution protects persons, not just good persons and not just Americans, but all persons, they would have themselves, politicians, assume the judicial role and decide who can get away from the waterboarding and into a federal prison instead.
This is an orgy. This is an orgy of power grabbing.
Yes, it is.
By the executive and
yes, it is.
The legislative. And again, I hear all these neocons on radio and TV saying, oh, we don't want to let Al-Qaeda go. But the point is, we know that all of this is written, and we have the Homeland Security internal documents. This whole thing is designed and pointed at returning veterans, gun owners, conservatives, libertarians. This is for the American people.
You know, when Janet, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, Janet, what's her name, announced that the most dangerous people on the planet were the groups you just indicated. Right-to-lifers, people who believe in the Second Amendment, returning veterans from the wars, people who think taxes are too high and the government is too onerous. I got in an argument on air with one of my Fox colleagues who said to me, well, she knows that you are in favor of Second Amendment rights, and she knows you're pro-life, and she knows you're against the IRS, but how does she know that everybody else feels that way? I said, because she can capture, her agents can capture every keystroke on your computer. How can she do that, he says? Because she has the power under the Patriot Act, which I won't tell you which Fox colleague this was, but you can probably guess, which you supported when your guy, George W. Bush, was in the White House. Now it's in the hands of those who would use this power against you. What are you, crazy? Don't you realize liberty, once given up and put in the hands of the government as power, never comes back? When will they learn? When will they learn, Alex? The Patriot Act wasn't enough for them to learn from. Now it's being used on them, the neocons themselves. This monstrosity from McCain and Lindsey Graham, where they can lock up any American they want and waterboard the person until the legislature says to stop. This is not America.
This is not America. Let's talk about the heart and soul of the Republican Party. The leadership predominantly are, as you said, just the other wing of the big government party. They're the twins.
Right.
And everywhere.
If George W. Bush had proposed Obamacare, the Republicans that are screaming the loudest now would be supporting it. That's what I think of their fidelity to the Constitution, to the primacy of the individual, and to the free market. To them, it's just a game of R versus D. It has nothing to do with the natural law or human liberty. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I wanted to get that in because it infuriates me
I
when
totally
Republicans
agree.
claim to be pure here. They're no more pure than the other side. They just happen to be in the minority, so it's convenient and comfortable for them to oppose this monstrosity.
Well, I agree with you. Let me then pose the question this way for you. We've seen top Republican strategists come out against Rand Paul and say they've got to defeat them. They're now allowing the head election official who's running against Rand Paul and the Republican Party to not recuse himself, but run the election that he himself is running in.
Correct.
The Associated Press. So I want to get your take on that. We have all these other Republican strategists demonizing the Tea Parties, demonizing the birthers. When we know his name's Barry Soetoro, we know he gave up his citizenship and became an Indonesian, regardless of what happened in Kenya. And where there's smoke, there's fire. We know that the mainline blue blood leadership is attempting to demonize and shut down debate and stop the American people from using the Republican Party to take our country back. What are your expert recommendations? Because those were, absolutely spot on earlier on what the state should do with Obamacare. What is your recommendation for the American people to not just let the Republicans play the part of opposition and then get in power and basically go along with all this?
I think the American people should vote out of office and aggressively hound out of office, lawfully, obviously, not only everyone who voted for Obamacare, but everyone who voted for TARP, proposed by George W. Bush, everyone who voted for the first two stimuluses that we've had in the past 4 years, which came from George W. Bush, everyone who voted for the Patriot Act, which came from George W. Bush, everyone who voted for any tax increase. Now, that would be about 93 to 94% of the Congress. These people's voting records must be revealed. The collusion of Rand Paul being forced to run against the guy who was in charge of counting the ballots. Even Joe Stalin wouldn't have been so bold as to do that. He would have put a crony in to count the ballots. But in Kentucky, the Republicans are forcing Rand Paul to run against the guy who will decide who wins the election. The American public cannot put up with that. They need to file lawsuits. They need to listen to you. They need to listen to what I attempt to do at Fox. They need to educate themselves. They need to know what their rights are, and they cannot take this sitting down. Now, Alex, you know I have been privileged to be the keynote speaker at many of these Tea Parties. These folks are not going away. They are not going to be co-opted by the Republicans. They are as much a threat to the Republican leadership, thank God, as they are are to the Democratic leadership because they understand that the Constitution was written to keep the government off the people's backs, not to find sneaky ways for the government to do it and get away with it.
Let's expand into Rand Paul, Ron Paul's son. I mean, in many polls, he's 10 points ahead.
Right.
He's a shoo-in to win. And this illustrates, and the Republican leadership admits this isn't just an anti-Democrat incumbency. This is an anti-incumbent period. And the guy he's running against is getting all this AIG banker money. He's a globalist. And then meanwhile, he's going to run the election. And I talked to Rand Paul's people 2 days ago, and they talked about, they went to the commission and they said unanimously, no, he can run your election. But then we looked at past rulings in other states. They've always said someone has to recuse themselves if they're the state's head election official and are running. I mean, again, it just shows how every form of common sense and checks and balances are being removed. And when you have a real constitutionalist running for an office, in come the Republican Party to try to destroy them.
They fear someone like Rand Paul just as much as they fear his father, Ron Paul, because of their utter fidelity to the Constitution and to the natural law and to the belief that the individual is greater than the government.